The breath came up through the floor. Not mine. I was sitting alone in my dead father's apartment at 3 in the morning, and somewhere beneath the soles of my shoes, down past the concrete, down past the pipes, something was breathing. Slow. Patient. Like it had been waiting under that building for 16 years and had all the time left in the world. I remember freezing with my hand on the mouse, the blue light of his monitor painting my knuckles the color of a corpse, and thinking one single thought with perfect clarity. He wasn't crazy. Oh God. He wasn't crazy at all. But let me go back. Let me start where it really started, because if I don't tell it in order, you won't believe me, and I need you to believe me. My father died at 1:04 in the morning, and the last thing he did on this earth was dig his fingernails into my arm hard enough to draw blood. The hospital room had that smell. You know the one. Bleach laid over something sweeter and worse underneath, the smell of a body slowly giving up. The machines beside his bed had been ticking and beeping for 3 days, and I had grown so used to the rhythm that when it changed, my whole body knew before my mind did. The peaks on the monitor went shallow. Then shallower. His chest rose, held, and lowered, and his eyes, those dark, sunken, hollowed-out eyes that had always seemed to be looking at something just past you, those eyes found mine. And even dying, even with the cancer eating the last of him, my father looked afraid. His hand shot out. I didn't know he had the strength left. His fingers closed around my forearm, the nails biting in, and he pulled me down toward his face. His breath was wrought and copper. His lips were cracked and trembling, and the words came out of him like they cost him the last of his life to say. I can hear them. They're still down there. All those lights. The emptiness. I tried. A tear slid down the gray skin of his cheek. The heart monitor climbed, beeping faster, louder, frantic. I really tried. I'm sorry. I'm afraid. I'm afraid I'll, and then the breath went out of him and didn't come back. His eyes stayed open. Stayed on mine. The monitor stretched the beeping into one long, flat, endless tone, and then a nurse was reaching past me to silence it, and the room fell into a silence so complete I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I sat there in the dark with no one to hold my hand. My name is Eli, by the way. And the man in that bed was Detective Ray Holloway, and he was, by every account I'd ever been given, a madman. Scene 2. I should explain about my father. I barely knew him. That's the truth of it, and it's a truth I'll carry like a stone in my chest for the rest of my days. My mother took me away from him when I was small, and the few times I saw him after that, he was never really there. He'd sit across from me at some diner, stirring coffee he never drank, and his eyes would drift down to the floor in the middle of a sentence, his head tilting, like he was listening to something coming up through the tiles. I'd ask him a question and he'd come back from somewhere far away and say what? And I'd lose my nerve and say nothing. My mother told me he'd had a breakdown. That he wasn't safe. That his obsessions had eaten the man she married until there was nothing left but the obsessions themselves. When I was a kid, I believed her. It was easier to believe that the strange, frightening man who couldn't hold my gaze was simply broken than to wonder what had broken him. She had moved us 4 times. 4 times across the country, for new schools, for sets of boxes. To get away from him, she always said. And I always thought, even then, even as a child, he was a detective, Mom. You can't outrun a man whose whole job is finding people who don't want to be found. He found us once. I remember it. I was 9. He stood at the end of our driveway in the rain and didn't come any closer, and my mother stood in the doorway and didn't let him. They just looked at each other. Across 40 feet of wet asphalt, and then he got back in his car and drove away, and we moved again the next month. So when the hospital called and said my father was dying and had listed me, of all people, as his next of kin, I almost didn't go. I want to be honest about that. I almost let him die alone. I'm glad I went. And I will spend my life wishing I hadn't. When he gripped my arm with those last words, his other hand had pressed something cold into my palm. A key. The key to his apartment. He'd been carrying it for me. He'd planned this. Even drowning in fear, my father had wanted me to go there. Scene 3. I called my mother from the parking lot. 1 in the morning, and she picked up on the 4th ring, which told me she hadn't been sleeping either. He was deranged, Eli. Her voice was tight and quick. Look, whatever he did, whatever he said to you, just forget it. It doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't concern you. He gave me his keys, Mom. A pause on the line. The kind of pause that has weight. He gave you his keys. What was he supposed to do? Let the complex throw his stuff in a dumpster? Guess that makes up for all the years of not being your father. Her voice could have stripped paint. I looked up at the stars over the hospital, at the cold pinpricks of them, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Anger. Not at him. At her. You ran. You ran from him for 20 years and you never once let him explain himself. But I didn't say it. I said, what was it, Mom? What were his obsessions? Every time I ever asked you, you changed the subject. What were you so afraid of? I heard her breathing change. Get heavy. I wasn't afraid of him. That's not true and we both know it. You moved us 4 times. You think a detective couldn't find us if he wanted? He did find us. My voice cracked. He just never came in. It's late, Eli. What do you even want? I made a decision right there in that parking lot. Nothing. I'm going to his apartment. I'm going to see what's there. This late? Absolutely not. You stay put. We'll go together tomorrow, when it's light. I want to be there. And I knew, that if I waited for her, she would drag her feet for a week, and then she would hire someone to clear the place out without ever setting foot in it, and whatever my father had been so afraid of would go into a landfill and I would never know. Okay, I said. Promise me. Promise me you won't go there tonight. I promise, Mom. I lied. I hung up the phone, and I drove to my dead father's apartment, and I have not had a single full night of sleep since. Scene 4. The apartment was on the ground floor of an old brick complex on the east side of the city, the kind of building that has settled so far into itself that all the doors hang crooked in their frames. The key turned hard. And when I pushed the door open, it let out a long, splitting groan that seemed to go on far too long, loud enough that I was sure I'd woken every neighbor on the floor. I stepped inside and shut it behind me, and the silence that came down was immediate and total, like a held breath. The air was wrong. Stale and thick, the air of a place that had been sealed up, but underneath the staleness there was something else, a faint mineral smell, wet stone and old water, the smell you get standing at the mouth of a cave. I told myself it was the building's plumbing. Old pipes. That's all. And then the goosebumps came. They climbed up both my arms at once, a cold wave that lifted every hair on my body, and I had the sudden, total, animal certainty that I was not alone. That something in that apartment had been waiting. That it had heard the door, and it had turned its attention toward me, and it was glad. I want to tell you I turned around and left. I didn't. I told myself it was grief. I told myself it was exhaustion and a guilty conscience and the strangeness of standing in the home of a man I'd barely known, 2 hours after watching him die. That's all this is, Eli. That's all. I reached for the light switch. 3 of the 4 bulbs in the living room fixture were dead. The one that worked buzzed and flickered and gave off a sick yellow half-light that somehow made the room darker. So I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight, and that thin white beam was the only honest light I had as I started to look around. The living room was a graveyard of paper. Stacks of it. Books with their spines broken, manila folders gone soft with age, newspapers yellowed and curling. A single recliner sat in the middle of it all, facing the dead television, and the sight of that one chair, no couch, no second seat, nothing for any visitor who was never going to come, put an ache in my chest I wasn't ready for. My father had sat alone in this room for years. Listening. Then my flashlight found the wall behind the recliner, and the ache turned into something colder. He had written on it. In black ink, in letters huge and small, crammed together and overlapping, my father had covered the entire wall in words. All these lights, all these rooms, they followed it, we followed them, don't go into the tunnels, don't go, do not go, do go. Now I stumbled backward. My heel caught a stack of books and sent it sliding. Between the words were drawings, pipes, boxes, crude diagrams of right angles and circles, repeated over and over like a man trying to map something he could only half remember. My flashlight followed the trail of ink up the wall, up toward the ceiling, and my breath stopped in my throat. The whole ceiling was black with it. Scrawls and scratches edge to edge. And there, in the very center, not written in ink but carved, gouged into the plaster with something sharp, a knife, the strokes deep and ragged and desperate, do you hear them? I'm not ashamed to tell you I nearly ran. My stomach turned over. The mineral smell seemed stronger now, the whetstone reek of underground water, and I thought, this is the house of a sick man, this is what madness looks like when it has a whole apartment to grow in, and I was halfway to the door, halfway to fresh air and getting in my car and calling my mother and admitting she'd been right about everything, when I saw the blue light. It came from under a door at the end of a short hall, pulsing faintly, on and off, on and off. The flicker of a screen. And against every instinct I had, I went toward it. Scene 5. Have you ever felt like something was watching you, really watching, the certainty of it crawling up your spine in a room you know is empty? Tell me in the comments. Because I have never felt it stronger than I did in that hallway, walking toward that blue light, with the carved words on the ceiling behind me asking if I could hear them. The door was nearly shut. I pushed it open. A small office. A desk, a chair on casters, and a computer, an old tower, humming away in the dark, its fan rattling. The monitor flickered through a screensaver, and the screensaver was a blueprint. Pale blue lines on black. I stepped closer and tried the light switch. Nothing. Of course nothing. I raised my phone and read the screensaver. It was a schematic of a tunnel system, passages and junctions and chambers running in every direction, labeled in a tiny technical font I had to lean in to read. Stormwater overflow. Maintenance access. Abandoned Section 4. It was the underside of the city. The bones beneath the streets. I sat down in his chair. The casters squeaked. And to my right, half buried under the clutter, was a newspaper. I picked it up and a small avalanche of gray dust slid off it and hung in my flashlight beam like a galaxy. The date was over 16 years old. The headline took up half the page. 9 children missing. Below it, 9 small photographs. School pictures, that washed-out blue background they all have. 9 kids, all of them around 13 or 14, all of them smiling the careless smile of children who think they have decades ahead of them. I looked at each little face in turn, and as I did, the hair on the back of my neck stood up one prickle at a time. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun the chair around so fast I nearly fell out of it, my flashlight slashing across the dark, my heart slamming, absolutely certain I would see my father standing in the doorway, gray and dead and afraid. Nothing. An empty doorway. An empty room. I sat there breathing like I'd run a mile, telling myself it was the building settling, old wood, that's all, Eli, and that was when my light caught a flat white edge on the shelf behind the desk. A DVD case. I pulled it free. There was a disc inside, and on the disc, in the same black marker as the words on the wall, 4 words were written. Body cam footage, April. And the year. The same year as the newspaper. My hands were not steady when I slid it into the drive. Scene 6. The computer wanted a password. I almost gave up. I'm bad with computers, I didn't know the man, and I sat there in the blue dark feeling the weight of all the things I'd never gotten to ask him. I typed admin wrong. I typed it in capitals. Wrong. I tried my mother's name, hating myself a little for it. Wrong. Then I typed my own name. Eli. The screen unlocked. I don't have words for what that did to me. A man who could not look me in the eye, a man I'd been told was too broken to be trusted, had used my name as the key to the one secret he'd guarded until his death. The guilt rose up in me like floodwater. I almost closed the whole thing. I almost walked away and let him keep his secrets. I didn't. God help me, I clicked the disk. 4 video files. I opened the first and turned the volume up, and the speakers hissed to life. The screen went to gray snow, then resolved. And there was my father. Alive. Not the gray husk from the hospital bed. Not the man in the rain at the end of our driveway. A young man, healthy, broad through the shoulders, his face full and unlined as he reached up to adjust the camera strap to his chest. For a moment he looked straight into the lens, straight at me, across 16 years and a fresh grave, and I had to grip the edge of the desk. I had never seen my father look like that. He looked strong. He looked like a man who believed the world made sense. The camera lurched as he got out of a car. A timestamp in the corner read 5:17 p.m. Sunlight flared white across the frame, and as it settled I saw he was walking toward a concrete parking structure, a big multi-level garage, its mouth dark and cool-looking against the bright afternoon. Inside, a uniformed officer was waiting. A heavy-set man, sweating through his collar, breathing hard just from standing. "Hey, Ray," the officer said. "What do you got for me, Boyd?" my father asked. His voice was so clear, so alive, that my throat closed up. Boyd wiped his forehead. "Kids. 9 of them. 8th graders. Missing since this morning, none of them showed up to school. Parents are losing their minds. Got a couple of their friends up ahead, been keeping them here for you. I think you'll want to hear it from them." "Wonderful," my father said dryly, and they started walking deeper into the garage. Another waste of my afternoon. They ditched school and they're scared to go home and face it. Maybe. Boyd scratched the back of his neck, and something in the gesture made the hair on my arms lift again. Tell you the truth, Ray. I don't think so. Not these ones. Scene 7 up ahead, 2 boys waited. 13, maybe 14. They stood close together near a gray maintenance door set into the concrete wall, and even through an old, low-resolution recording, even 16 years gone, I could see how frightened they were. They wouldn't look at the camera. They wouldn't look at each other. I'm Detective Holloway, my father said, and his voice had changed, gentler now, the hard sarcasm folded away. He turned to the boy on the left. Let's start with you, son. What's your name? Toby. The boy's voice shook. Nice to meet you, Toby. You want to tell me what's going on? Toby opened his mouth and nothing came out. The other boy answered for him. They went down there. And your name? Mason. Down where, Mason? The boy lifted his arm and pointed at the gray maintenance door. Through there. Was it locked, when they went in? Mason shook his head. Did you see them go? A nod. They wanted us to come. I didn't. Why'd they want to go down there? And Mason said a word that, sitting alone in that dead man's office, made the cold come back over my whole body. The rooms. The sewer? Boyd asked. Both boys shook their heads hard. Not the sewer, Mason said. The rooms. The kids at school talk about it. All the time. My father crouched a little, to be level with them. Other kids have gone down there. I dunno. They talk like they have. I'm not sure. Then Toby spoke up, his voice barely there. Wendell told them about it. Boyd straightened. Not the homeless guy. The one who's always camped out in this garage. Both boys nodded. That's Wendell Cross, Boyd said to my father. You've crossed paths with him before, I'd bet. My father exhaled through his nose. The addict. Always finding some new way to make himself a problem. Doesn't shock me he's holed up in the sewers now. Luxury accommodations, for him, Boyd said, and gave a laugh that didn't have much air behind it. My father turned back to the boys. You watched your friends follow this man through that door. They nodded together. Toby's voice was nothing but a thread. He said he found something. Down there. He said they had to see it. The video cut to black. Scene 8. If this story is keeping you up, if you're sitting there with the lights on a little brighter than usual, subscribe. We post new horror every single night. You're going to want company for what comes next, because this is where my father went down the stairs, and I think a part of him never came back up. The second clip opened already in motion. My father and Boyd were descending a spiral metal staircase, tight and rusted, their boots ringing on the steps. The camera bounced with every footfall. Every dozen steps or so they'd pass a bare bulb screwed into the concrete wall, throwing a little pool of light, and then the dark would swallow them again until the next one. The stairs went down, and down, and down. I could hear the two men talking, but the clatter of their feet drowned the words. It went on so long I started to feel it in my own stomach, that endless downward turning, like the building had no bottom. When they finally reached the floor, there were voices on the far side of a heavy steel door. Boyd hauled it open, and they stepped into a tunnel. It was big. Bigger than I expected, a vaulted concrete passage you could have driven a truck through, vanishing into black in both directions. On a raised platform stood a cluster of men. Some in police uniforms, some in the reflective gear of a city work crew, a couple in the heavy coats of firefighters. Every one of them wore a hard hat, and every one of them had the same look on his face. The look of men confronted with something that didn't fit in their heads. A man in a blue hard hat turned as they approached. He didn't say hello. He said, "I can hear them. But it doesn't make sense." They were all gathered around a folding table with a blueprint spread across it, the same blueprint, I realized, that was running as the screensaver on the monitor in front of me right now. My skin crawled. My father cleared his throat. "Where do you believe the children are?" A firefighter leaned over the table and put his finger on the map. "Here. This chamber, right here." He moved his finger an inch. "And we're standing about here. A block away, give or take. We can hear them. Talking. Whispering to each other. We think they're still hiding from us. Still scared." "Take me," my father said. Scene 9. The whole group moved off down the tunnel, boots scuffing, flashlight beams swinging across wet concrete. The camera caught the walls, slick with damp, streaked with mineral white, the same whetstone smell I'd been breathing in this apartment for the last hour somehow reaching up out of the speakers and into the back of my throat. They rounded a corner, and then another, and came to an opening cut into the side of the main tunnel, a smaller room, maybe the size of a bedroom. On the left wall, a cluster of fat vertical pipes ran floor to ceiling. On the right, a single horizontal pipe stuck out of the bare concrete, about 8 inches across, capped open. 3 more men were already in there, talking low. The firefighter stopped and pointed at the small horizontal pipe. "There. You put your ear to that, you can hear them." My father got down on his knees in front of it. The camera tilted as he bent, so the pipe went out of frame and instead I was looking at the boots and legs of the other men standing around the little room, watching, helpless, their faces caught in the swinging light. And then I heard it. A child's giggle. Thin and bright and unmistakable, coming up out of that pipe. Then a voice, a kid's voice, words half-formed by the echo, give it back," and another giggle layered over it, and then more of them, a whole scatter of young voices murmuring and laughing somewhere down inside the concrete. I felt my own arms break out in gooseflesh. Sitting in that chair. 16 years later. On the recording, my father leaned closer to the pipe. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" The giggling went on. Indifferent. Like he wasn't there. He pulled a heavy metal flashlight off his belt and rapped it against the pipe, 3 sharp clangs that rang down the line and slowly faded into nothing. "Hello? Is anyone there? My name is Detective Holloway. We're here to help you. Just tell me where you are." The children laughed. And then one of the men in the room, the one in the blue hard hat, his face gone red and tight, slammed his hand down against the wall and said, "I get that we can all hear them. I do. But I'm telling you, none of this makes any sense." "Easy, Mercer," Boyd said. He had his arms crossed tight over his chest. The man named Mercer lowered his head. Then he raised it and looked straight at that little pipe, his eyes fixed and burning, and he said the thing that I have not been able to stop hearing since. "That pipe was abandoned years ago. It doesn't go anywhere. It leads to nothing, solid concrete, poured concrete, more and more of it. It was supposed to be for overflow and the plan got scrapped before it was ever finished. I was here. I was standing right here the day we put it in. His voice was climbing, cracking. It is not connected to anything. Not to other pipes. Not to any room. Not to any chamber. There is no space behind that wall big enough for a cat to crawl through, let alone a child. A toddler couldn't fit. There is nothing in there. The room went dead quiet. Every flashlight beam in that little concrete box turned and pointed at the pipe in the wall. And out of the pipe, out of 8 inches of pipe that led to nothing, to solid poured concrete, to a place where nothing living could possibly be, the children went on laughing. The footage ended. The screen dropped to gray static, and then to that pale blue blueprint screensaver, the tunnels glowing softly in the dark. Scene 10. I don't know how long I sat there. The fan in the tower rattled. The screensaver pulsed. Somewhere above me a neighbor's footsteps crossed a floor and went still. And then the breathing started. I told you I'd bring you back to where I began. This is it. Slow, and deep, and patient, coming up through the floor of that apartment, up through the carpet, up through the boards, up out of the concrete and the pipes and the dark beneath the dark. I sat in my dead father's chair with 3 unwatched videos still on the disc, and I finally understood the smell that had been in the apartment since the moment I walked in. It wasn't the plumbing. It was the tunnels. He had lived for 16 years directly over them, with his ear to the floor, because somewhere down there 9 children were still laughing in a room that doesn't exist, and my father couldn't stop listening for them. I can hear them. They're still down there. I tried. I really tried. What would you have done? I still wonder, to this day, whether I should have taken the disc and burned it. Whether I should have stayed and watched the other 3. Whether the smartest thing my mother ever did was run, and the worst thing I ever did was pick up a dying man's key. I took the disc. I left the lights, what lights there were, burning behind me. I did not watch the other 3 videos that night. I have them still, in a drawer I don't open, and on the nights when the house is too quiet I swear I can hear, very faintly, from somewhere under the foundation, the sound of a child telling another child to give it back. My father wrote, "Do you hear them?" into his ceiling with a knife. I do now, Dad. I do. Subscribe for more horror every single night. And if you want more stories that will keep you up, check out What the Wow Stories for the wildest relationship drama you've ever heard. Link below. Sleep well.